Fireside CharLA series is brought to you in partnership with the United Latinx Fund and Latino Coalition of Los Angeles. I'm Richard Corral, Interim Executive Director of the United Latinx Fund. This online event series aims to engage, educate, and advocate on important and timely topics that impact LA's Latinx community during the COVID-19 pandemic and during the current civil unrest. I'd like to quickly thank our sponsors for tonight's event, Southern California Gas Company and JP Morgan Chase, for their commitment to and investment in nonprofits like the United Latinx Fund that work to transform, uplift, and improve our community's quality of life. Our program is designed to engage you, our audience. So if you have any questions, please enter your questions in the chat box, and note that everyone's audio and video will be muted until the question and answer session. Also, tonight's program is streaming on Facebook Live. So to access the video, please visit ULF's Facebook page, and the link is provided in the chat box. Also, if you'd like to access the Spanish translation, please note that there's a button at the bottom of your screen. It says interpretation, and it has a globe, and it says English and Spanish interpretation available. Go ahead and press that button. Tonight's conversation centers on two prevalent and timely topics: LA Pride's 50th anniversary, a retrospective, Latinx leadership, resilience, and empowerment. As 2020 commemorates the 50th anniversary of LA Pride, this week's CharLA celebrates this historic milestone by looking back on LA's LGBTQ Latinx community, its current challenges, and the opportunities ahead. We will hear from LGBTQ Latinx leadership on how their community is impacted by COVID-19, as well as efforts to queer the census. Finally, we will look back on some of the community's most significant accomplishments and historic milestones as documented by the feature-length documentary, LA, A Queer History, and we'll show short clips during tonight's mixer, immediately following this conversation, as well as a Q&A with the director and writer. So please stay tuned. Let's get started. With us tonight, we have Eddie Martinez, the Executive Director of the Latino Equality Alliance, Bambi Salcedo, President and CEO of Trans Latina Coalition, Adan Chavez, Deputy Director, National Census Program for NALEO, and Gregorio Davila, Writer-Director, LA, A Queer History. Let's dive right in, shall we? Bambi, how has COVID-19 disproportionately impacted the LGBTQ POC community, specifically the Trans Latina community that your organization serves? Bambi.
First, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with all of you and to be able to share stage with amazing individuals. We as an organization, have been doing a lot of great work. For the last, since the pandemic started and since everything was ordered to shut down, our organization made the decision to continue to provide services. One of the services that we were providing to our community even before the pandemic was lunch meals every day. And so we knew that because of everything that was happening and because everything was going to be basically shut off, we made the decision as an organization that we, to the very least, needed to provide food to the people who access services at our organization. And so we've been providing services, food every single day. We provide about 30 meals to trans people who come and get food with us. We also continue to provide case management services. And we actually, through the support of several different foundations, we have been getting a few grants to distribute emergency support to our community. And so, so far we have distributed about $100,000 to trans people in Los Angeles. And so we continue to do the work, but I think what I want to also mention, and that is important for all of us to understand and recognize, is, you know, where trans people was positioned in 2020 before this pandemic started, and really understanding that this pandemic is going to set the trans community even further behind than how we were, right? We know that trans people continue to experience discrimination while trying to access employment, housing, healthcare services, basically all the social services that we all need and could potentially have access to. But for trans people, it's completely different. And so we know that there's going to be more trans people homeless, at least here in Los Angeles. And, you know, and even, you know, for the people that we serve, when there was this emergency relief from Gavin Newsom, our state governor, and, you know, supporting, allocating, I believe it was $76 million to support undocumented people. The requirements for trans people to actually have access to that, those trans people who were undocumented, many didn't have the opportunity to have access to that money. And so that's why, you know, we obviously wanted to respond, and we're having conversations with different funders for us to help, you know, to be able to support our community in that way. So we're definitely doing the best that we can with the limited resources that we have. And we are going to continue to support our community to the best possible way.
Thank you, Andy. What I take away from what you just shared is that to a certain extent, and I know we've had conversations, you're open for business. It's business as usual. I mean, you are continuing to provide the services because the need is there, you know. COVID has really exacerbated the existing challenges, discrimination, limited resources that you were already challenged with, right? And so one of the things that I'm hoping to do today, and is an explicit conversation and question, is how can we all, you know, as a community support each other, right? And so we will be having that discussion a little bit later, because I think all of us are facing something very similar. It's business as usual plus more challenges, you know, on top of it. So we will be having that intentional conversation. One other thing, I do want to remind folks to please put your questions on the chat box. I am moderating the chat box today in the absence of our board chair from LCLA, Cindy. And so I want to make sure that we do answer everybody's questions. Un breve anuncio, por favor. Si usted quiere escuchar este programa en español, por favor, seleccione español en el menú debajo a gracias. I'd like to pivot to the next question. And this goes out to Adan and Eddie. Adan, we'll start with you, and then Eddie and Yesenia will follow up. What unique opportunities does this year's census provide LGBT POC communities? And how have nonprofits stepped up to ensure that these communities complete the census? Adan.
Of course, thanks so much, Richard, for the question, and thank you to all of our fellow colleagues for your work. I think that the conversation around the census is very timely, right? Because right now in the middle of a pandemic, we know that it's exactly these resources that our elected officials, whether they be at the city, state, federal level, are using to really respond, right, to the pandemic that we're in. In addition to that, I think that the census really gives us a good opportunity, and it's another tool we can all be using to really raise our voice and let other people know that we are here, and that just like any other group, we also deserve to be counted. Nationally, there is about 1.5 trillions of dollars that come back to our communities. And these are dollars that we're able to get through the data that we're able to provide to the census. So we know that based off of these dollars and this data, that there are over 300 programs that receive funding in one kind of way or the other through the census. And it's many of these programs actually that many LGBTQ people depend on. Right, nationally, 20% of all LGBTQ families depend on things like Medicaid. Another 20% of LGBTQ families depend on things like SNAP. And if LGBT people are not counted, if our communities are not counted, not only do we not receive our fair share of these resources, but we also won't receive our fair share of political power. Right now, we know that LGBTQ people keep being discriminated in all kinds of ways, whether it be at home, at school, in the workforce, in the courtroom. And by us participating in the census, we're able to get really good data about the LGBTQ community to know whether or not this discrimination is actually taking place and whether or not civil rights policies that many LGBTQ people depend on are there to actually benefit LGBTQ people, right? And so this year around, this decade, this decennial census, there are two particular questions that are going to be able to help us get data about the LGBTQ community. First, this is the first time ever that we're able to know how many same-sex relationships and partnerships there is out there across the country. And so if folks do belong in the same-sex relationship, we're able to get somewhat of a picture of the LGBT community. Not fully, of course, and there's still more work to be done, but at least we can get some data. And two, the question around sex. We know that that's a tricky question, right, for many of our trans brothers and sisters who may not necessarily identify with the gender binary. The good thing is that the Census Bureau promotes self-identification, which means that it doesn't matter how you feel, what you look like, you can respond and identify in whatever way you feel most comfortable with, right? Which is important because the Census Bureau will never double check your information with a passport, a license, any other kind of legal document. So I want to let everybody know, right, to identify however you feel most comfortable with, because that is the way that we're able to get really good data about our community. So nonprofits across the country are working hard to make sure so many of our communities that desperately depend on this political power, on these resources are being counted. We at NALEO are also working hard. Just last week, we did a whole LGBT week of action with our partners over at the task force. We released this cool new video about drag queens answering our questions, addressing all of our myths and misconceptions about the census. We also have all kinds of LGBT focused graphics because we know that it's important that our people feel seen even in the work that we're doing. And we know that it's important to get them materials that they resonate with. So definitely join us in this fight. If you haven't been counted, it's still not too late. Check all these cool graphics and videos out on our NALEO Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages, and continue to engage with us on our website at hagasecontar.org. Thank you so much, Richard.
Absolutely, Adan. And I just took it upon myself to provide a link in the chat box for your NALEO LGBTQ Week of Action drag video toolkit. My understanding is you will not only learn how to paint your eyebrows, but you will also learn how to complete the census and to be able to answer authentically in terms of your gender identification.
Exactly. Thanks so much, Richard, for that. Yes, everyone should definitely check it out. There is so much cool information. But of course, if you have questions, we're definitely happy to answer them. So please keep sending them. Thank you, Richard.
No problem. And remember, please continue to provide your questions in the chat box if you have any. I'd like to transition over to Eddie and to Yesenia with the same question in terms of the census and how has your organization stepped up to ensure that these communities complete the census. I will also bring up a presentation, that hopefully you all can see my screen. And Eddie and Yesenia, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard, for allowing Yesenia and myself to be in this space with other distinguished leaders in our community. People that know us, Latino Equality Alliance, we serve the Latinx community in Los Angeles. We're based in Bow Heights at Mi Centro LGBT Community Center. And our mission is to advocate for equity, safety, and the wellness in the community. And by doing that, we got to build power to create the systemic changes. And we do that by engaging the youth and families. And it's about being visible, it's about being counted. And so that's why the census is so important to us. So we made a commitment in 2020 to make sure that our gente, our undocumented queers get counted. So if you can move on to the next slide. If whoever's the slide changer. Okay. Obviously there's our mission. We can move on to the next slide. And we made a commitment to really be very strategic on who we target. And we wanted to make sure we target Bow Heights and Southeast Los Angeles, both communities, Spanish is spoken often, working class, low income. We want to make sure they're the people we reach out to. So let's head on to the next slide. All right. So what we wanted to do this year, we were going to do door-to-door knocking. We were going to have pledge cards. We were going to have community forums, train the trainers, attend local events, distribute materials out in the community. But obviously, we had a pandemic hit us, so we had to pivot and we had to change. And I will allow Yesenia to kind of talk about the work we did today. And if you could hit on to the next slide.
So yeah, hello everyone. I haven't introduced myself. So my name is Yesenia Mendoza, and I'm the development coordinator for Latino Equality Alliance. Actually, all of our programming changed a lot because of COVID-19. So these are some of the images prior to COVID. So this is a census outreach we were doing. If you can hit the next slide, I can show you what we decided to go with when we realized that the pandemic was here. So some of the things that Leah has done is we've participated in 3 caravans. One was in Southgate, the other one was in Huntington Park, and the other one was in Boyle Heights. And we've also been having a lot of virtual events. So that was new to us. We've never done that. We had our CELA LGBTQ virtual town hall. And just last week, we had our Boyle Heights Pride, with our theme being Pride is Racial Justice and incorporating the census. Definitely a lot of our outreach right now is phone banking and text banking, because I believe it's the most effective. And we also, I really want to highlight, so our youth census coordinator, Jesus, came up with Miss Census. So Miss Census is a persona who talks about the census, but also educates the community in a very fun, educational way. And Miss Census announces our raffle winners every week, and we also have food pantries every Friday. So we give out 50 food baskets, and as we're giving out these baskets, we talk to the community, specifically to parents, and ask them whether or not they completed the census. And it's been very effective, and it also builds a lot of community trust, which is really our goal. And I'm definitely looking forward to coming up with newer, innovative ways of incorporating the census, especially within Latin communities, because it's very important that we queer the census.
And if we can move on to the next slide, I just want to share a quick story. Mm-hmm. So in Southgate, the city of Southgate decided to have a caravan. So we participated, and we wanted to have the Queer Mobile. And I was able to have the council member, Denise Diaz, be along with me in the ride. And after this caravan, she got this message from a resident. It was a young person who was currently in college and was studying and saw the caravan pass by. And this person, wasn't quite sure what it was, but then he realized it was about the census. And then when he saw the flag, it meant a lot to him. He felt like it counted, that the cities respect everyone in the community. And that is why it's so important for us to be in these spaces, because we got to make sure that people know that people care for them and that we want them to count. So that's what we did. We're going to continue to do this work into October 31. I believe that's the deadline. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the innovation in terms of how you were able to pivot. And by the way, I'm a big fan of Miss Census. I follow all of her shenanigans throughout town. Her various advisement, right? As well as I enjoy that sometimes she gets a little messy too, and I appreciate that. So instead, yeah.
Yeah, she does.
I'll take all of it. So I'd like to move on to the final question, and it's a sort of a popcorn. It's open to everybody, and you know, all of you are nonprofit service providers. So if you could share with us, what are the single greatest challenges you face when addressing COVID-19, the census, basically your work within the current moment, and then how can we help you? I'll start with Bambi. Let's unmute.
Hi, everyone. Well, thank you again so much, everyone, for their presentation. So there's obviously multiple challenges that we face as an organization, but I also want to say that we are super perrics, and we're going to make sure that we continue to really fight the system. I don't know if any of you know that in collaboration with other organizations, in Lambda Legal specifically, we're suing the Trump administration for specifically about the rule that is going to take effect in August about healthcare discrimination for LGBTQ people. So, you know, we're definitely fighting the structures, right? They continue to marginalize us, they continue to oppress us. As an organization, we are also at the statewide level. We have formed a statewide coalition of trans-led organizations, and for the first time in the story and the history of the state of California, at least this is what we learned, is that no other trans-led organization has done budget advocacy. And so we are asking, you know, Governor Newsom to allocate $100 million to specifically to support to build the infrastructure and direct services to trans-led organizations. And so we are focusing on employment and workforce development and economic development, housing, healthcare access, data collection, and healthcare services. So that's really what we're doing, you know. We're definitely making sure that we continue to support our community. And as the first and only trans-led organization here in Los Angeles, providing critical services to our community, it's important that we continue to build the power of our community. But in addition to that, we also have a campaign to invest in trans lives. So we are not just targeting the government, but we're also targeting the private sector, because what we learn is that in the private sector, a report that LGBTQ funders for LGBTQ issues released a report that only 4 cents out of every $100 are allocated to trans-led organizations. And so there's obviously, even within the LGBTQ community in terms of funding, there's a huge disparity, and we want to make sure that there's equity in, you know, in distribution of funding. And so yeah, I mean, despite the challenges, I mean, obviously, you know, right now we have a campaign to free Kelly. Kelly is a Salvadoreña, well, young girl or woman who has been in immigration detention for almost 3 years, and she's been there for no reason. And so we obviously have that campaign, and we're asking for ICE to release all people who are detained in immigration detention and in jails and in prisons, because they're the most vulnerable of infections, of contracting COVID-19. So it's, you know, scary times, but at the same time, you know, we have to continue to keep the fight going. And that's certainly as an organization, what we are going to continue to do. We don't necessarily focus to align with the system that continues to marginalize us, but rather how do we dismantle the system and figure out ways for the system to actually invest in the lives of trans people.
I love how COVID has sort of taken a lot of your existing campaigns that you've been working towards previously and taken them to a new level and giving them sort of a renewed purpose and intensity. And again, Bambi, it would be really helpful if you could just, while I pivot to Eddie and Yesenia, if you could put the links to the different campaigns, signature, gathering, calls to action. If you could do me a favor and put those in the chat box so that I can do two things. One, I already assembled a list of resources from the different speakers today. I'll be sharing that so I can add it. But also, if folks want to take action right now, they have that option. Eddie and Yesenia, the same question.
I'll go first and then Yesenia. I think right now, I always think about wellness and I think about solidarity. I think our greatest challenge when we went remote was the whole fear, isolation, and the mental health component of the stress that we were all feeling. And sometimes that energy, that the feelings that we have sometimes could work against us and sometimes makes us not as motivated or wanting to fight. And so I think what is so important for now as an organization and as a community and as activists out there, do everything in your power to keep yourself safe and well, because that's going to get us through this fight. And also solidarity, meaning that we really got to make sure that we build that support with other movements to work together, because that is what's going to push us through. Because what's going to happen over the next few months as we're still dealing with the pandemic and now election coming up, there's going to be forces out there that's going to try to divide us. They're going to try to disempower us. So it's so important right now to reach out to other folks and to build that bridge, build that common thread that we all work together. I think for us as an organization overall, we are fully committed to providing the resources, the education, and the spaces. It may not be at Mi Centro, but we do it online, and we're going to do our best. I'll pass it on to Yesenia.
So for me, one of the challenges that I found was that when talking with the community about the census and like COVID had just happened, people seemed really discouraged, like they weren't really interested in the census when they had more immediate needs. So it was really hard to find that message, that meaningful message that would really resonate with them. And then the second thing, because we're in the topic of having immediate needs, also the types of social services, right? So we do a lot of direct social services, like giving out free food, giving out free mental health therapists, right? And then we also have like HIV testing, and like these are immediate needs, but we haven't had a lot of time really to look at the structurals. So what is it about the food pantry? Like, why do people need food, right? Like that should be a basic need. People shouldn't have a basic need. And so that's something that if Bambi would allow us, that would be a perfect collaboration because it would get at the root of the systemic discrimination that's happening. And it's really hard to be a really small organization and do both. And so we are stretched pretty thin, but we do what we can and we do it to the best of our ability, and hopefully it creates a systemic change in the long run.
Thank you. Because we had so many more panelists than usual, I sort of ate into our Q&A segment of the program. Well, what I would like to do is I would like to ask everybody to stay to enjoy the clips from the featured documentary. And then what we'll do is we'll be able to open it up for questions after the documentary for both Gregorio and Mario that are connected with the film, but then also with anybody else, Eddie, Adan, Yesenia, and Bambi. I'm gonna wrap up really quickly so we can move to the feature film. I'd like to thank our panelists for a rich conversation. an action-oriented discussion. All of you have been helpful and supportive of the campaign for nonprofit resilience that ULF, in partnership with the Latino Coalition of Los Angeles, has launched. And I'm really excited to report that we have now reached 1,200 signatures. And we have moved on to now sharing the campaign with leadership at the highest level. So that includes the dean at the USC Keck School of Medicine, that includes Supervisor Ridley Thomas, that includes Council President Emeritus Herb Wesson. And they've all now, thanks to you and your partnership, embraced the campaign. And now they're sharing it with their constituents because they believe rightfully that it's important that the longevity and the sustainability of our organizations matter. And they believe in the vital work that we do. And they believe that resources should be dedicated and appropriated to the to sustain and further deepen the impact of the vital work that you do. So thank you so much. Without your partnership, this would not have been possible. In closing, I'd like to share that next week we'll be featuring our special guest, Assemblymember Mike Gibson. And Mike Gibson will be speaking about his two pieces of legislation. One, specifically around police violence and more specifically the chokehold and potentially banning that here in California. And then secondly, he's going to be talking about ACA 5, which for those who know is a constitutional amendment, a California constitutional amendment to reinstate affirmative action. So we're very excited to have those conversations. And that concludes today's program.